Have you ever looked back on your life and wondered, not where the time went, but whether you ever truly lived it? It's a quiet truth that many only begin to sense as the years pass. As the colors of life begin to soften and its rhythm slows. It's not the fear of death that unsettles most hearts in old age. It's the quiet ache of reflection. The sobering realization that while we were so busy filling our calendars, we may have forgotten to fill our hearts. We race through the years with urgency, thinking we're chasing success or security. But what we were really yearning for was often something much simpler, a breath of peace. A moment of stillness, the feeling of being fully present, right here, right now. A few winters ago, I spent several weeks at a small temple hidden in the misty mountains outside Shanghai. Nestled among pine trees and patches of moss, it felt like a place the world had forgotten, but in the most beautiful way. The abbot, a retired monk in his 80s, followed a quiet routine that left a lasting impression on me. Each morning, just after dawn, he would sit silently by a small wooden window that opened to a garden of stone. Plum blossoms, and soft light. He never rushed. He rarely spoke, but one morning, as we sat together in peaceful silence, he looked out with a faint smile and said something I will never forget. When I was young, I chased after time. Now, in my old age, I realized time was always still. It was I who was running. His voice didn't carry regret. It carried reverence, the kind of gentle wisdom you can't find in books, but only in the quiet hours most people overlook. What he had discovered, and what so many of us miss, is that the richness of life doesn't lie in how many years we live, but in how present we are within those years. Because as we grow older, many of us begin to feel time accelerating. Days disappear, months slip past. A whole year ends before we've even learned to say its name. We keep saying, someday, I'll slow down, someday, I'll rest, someday, I'll truly live. But someday is a dangerous word. It whispers comfort, but steals the only thing we truly have, this moment. The Buddha once said, "The trouble is, you think you have time." He wasn't trying to scare us. He was trying to wake us up, to remind us that time isn't something we possess. It's something we pass through. Like a river, it flows, and all we can do is feel it, be with it, moment by precious moment. In this video, we'll take a quiet, contemplative journey through 13 reflections, rooted in Buddhist wisdom, life experience, and heartfelt stories on how to spend our time wisely, especially in the later seasons of life. Each part touches on a unique area of human experience: time, priorities, relationships, creativity, inner peace, and more. Since this video is longer than usual, you'll find a full list of chapters with timestamps in the description below. You can follow the full journey, or return later to explore the sections that speak most deeply to you. And if you're watching this now, perhaps with a warm cup of tea in hand, I invite you to slow down with me. Breathe, let go of urgency. You are not behind, you are not late. You are right on time to begin again. Part 1. The Illusion of Time. There's something mysterious that happens as we grow older. When we were children, a single summer felt like forever. Days stretched wide and slow, like golden sunlight spilling across the floor. Every little thing, a family picnic, a bike ride, the sound of cicadas on a warm evening, felt unforgettable, vivid, alive. But now? The months blur. The years vanish like pages in a book we barely had time to read. Why is that? The Buddha taught that everything is impermanent, but he also reminded us that our perception of reality is often shaped by the restless mind. Time, as we experience it, is not a fixed measurement. It is a sensation, a perception, deeply tied to our awareness. The more awake we are to a moment, the longer and richer it feels. And so perhaps, the key is not to stop time, but to wake up to it. To be fully present before it passes us by. If our experience of time depends on our awareness, then what happens when we sleepwalk through our days? The answer, for many, is that time simply disappears. And yet, the more distracted, routine, or mindless our lives become, the faster time seems to slip through our fingers, like water escaping cupped hands. It vanishes not with noise, but in silence. I once met an elderly woman named Clara during a quiet weekend retreat in Oregon. She was 78 years old, had raised 4 children, outlived her husband, and volunteered twice a week at the local library. Her life, by all accounts, was full, but something she said that afternoon stayed with me. As we sat beneath a maple tree, sipping tea, she gazed out over the still surface of the lake and whispered, "I don't remember most of my life, not because I didn't live it, but because I wasn't really there." That moment struck me deeply, and the truth is, Clara's experience is more common than we care to admit. As adults, our lives fall into repetitive patterns. We wake up, brew the same coffee, scroll the same headlines, carry out the same tasks. Conversations become predictable, chores blur together, and slowly, our days become loops, efficient, yes, but also forgettable. Neurologically, the brain is built to prioritize efficiency. When it encounters something new, it lights up, pays attention, but when it recognizes routine, it goes into autopilot. That's why time seems to slow down when we're traveling, falling in love, or learning something new. Our awareness is fully engaged. But in old age, when routines often become even more fixed, time collapses, days blend into each other. We move through life, but we're not truly in it. From a Buddhist perspective, this is a form of time blindness, a kind of spiritual drowsiness. We may be active, busy, even helpful, but without awareness. It's like watching life through a fogged window. The Buddha taught his disciples to cultivate sati, or mindfulness, not just in meditation halls, but in everyday living. He once said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." It sounds simple, but truly living in the present requires effort, not forceful effort, but gentle, compassionate attention. And it doesn't require drastic changes. Sometimes, it's as simple as gently waking ourselves up to what is already here. One powerful way to reclaim our experience of time is to invite small moments of novelty. Not in the pursuit of excitement, but to break the hypnotic grip of routine. Take a different route on your morning walk. Prepare a dish you've never tried cooking before. Sit in a different chair for breakfast. Talk to someone new at the market. These little acts may seem trivial, but they awaken the senses. They gently nudge us back into the moment. Another practice is to pause intentionally throughout the day. Just 10 seconds to breathe. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Notice the way the wind moves through the trees, or how sunlight rests on your skin. These micro moments, when practiced regularly, become anchors. They help slow time. They bring you back to yourself. And perhaps most important of all, reflect daily, even if just for a few lines in a journal. Write what you felt, saw, learned, or simply noticed. When we write it down, the mind records it as meaningful. We remember. We imprint the day with purpose. As one Zen master once said, "A day without reflection is like a meal without salt." In the end, the real illusion is not that time moves quickly. The illusion is believing we are powerless to slow it. But through mindfulness, through awareness, we can touch something eternal in a single breath, a single step, a single moment of presence. Because time isn't something we chase. It's something we awaken to. Part 2. What truly matters. There's a moment, quiet and unassuming, that tends to arrive somewhere in the second half of life. It doesn't burst in. It doesn't demand immediate action. Instead, it lingers like the long shadow of an afternoon sun. It's the realization that much of what once felt important may not have mattered that much at all. What truly matters? That question lingers, especially when we pause long enough to hear its answer rise from deep within. Ever since that quiet realization, I've noticed something striking. In all my years of sitting beside those at the edge of life, not one person ever asked for more meetings, more paychecks, or more emails. Not one. Instead, they asked for people, for presence, for time they never allowed themselves to fully receive. The Buddha often spoke of right view, a clarity of perception that helps us pierce through the fog of illusion and recognize the truths that set us free. One of those truths is this: not all tasks are equal. And not everything that demands our attention is worthy of it. Yet many of us, especially in the prime of our working years, fall into the trap of confusing movement with meaning. We keep ourselves endlessly busy, mistaking urgency for importance. We rush from one task to the next, filling our calendars but emptying our hearts. But time, quietly, patiently, reveals what truly matters. It's only when we look back, sometimes decades later, that we feel the ache of what we missed. The birthday we skipped, the hug we hurried through, the kind word we never offered because we were too distracted, too tired, too busy. In Buddhist teaching, there is a powerful reflection known as the 5 recollections, or Pancana Anusati. Among them is this timeless reminder: I am subject to aging. There is no escape from growing old. I am subject to death. There is no escape from dying. All that is dear to me will one day be separated from me. These truths are not meant to bring sadness. They are meant to wake us up, to shake us gently from the trance of routine and bring us back to the miracle of now. One practice I often recommend is what I call the deathbed perspective. It's simple, but deeply grounding. Picture yourself 30 years from now, lying in bed during your final days. reflecting on the life you've lived. What will rise to the surface in those last hours? Will it be the spotless kitchen? The perfectly organized inbox? The errands you completed with such precision? Or will it be something else entirely? The afternoon you sat and listened to your grandchild talk about the stars. The walk through falling leaves with a friend you hadn't seen in years. The quiet courage it took to forgive someone who never said sorry. The sunrise you watched alone and finally allowed yourself to feel. Clarity, it turns out, often comes in stillness, but in today's fast-paced world, we rarely give ourselves permission to slow down long enough to feel what truly matters. That's why we must learn to choose with intention. Especially as we grow older, we must become guardians of our own attention, not letting it be stolen by noise and distraction. Here's a small practice you can try each morning before the emails. The errands, the expectations take hold. Sit down with a pen and paper. Ask yourself gently, what would truly matter today if this were my last day? Don't overthink it. Just write. Let the answer come from your heart, not your schedule. Then, let that guide your next step. The Buddha once said, "Your work is to discover your work, and then, with all your heart, to give yourself to it." He wasn't just speaking of employment. He was speaking of Dharma, your soul's true purpose. That may be growing a garden, or being present for someone in pain, or simply sitting quietly, hands in your lap, watching the morning light spill across your floor, knowing that you are still here. Still breathing, still able to love. Because in the end, what truly matters is not how much we did, but how deeply we lived. Not how full our calendars became, but how full our hearts were along the way. And the most beautiful truth of all? It's never too late to begin living that way today. Part 3. Relationships as sacred grounds. There's a special kind of hush that settles over a room when someone over 70 speaks about old friends. It's not the loud nostalgia of youth recalling parties and crowds. It's something gentler, quieter, almost sacred. You'll often hear them say something like, "We ended the last reflection by asking ourselves what truly matters." And often, the answer whispers from the quiet corners of our relationships, those sacred grounds where love, loss, and presence shape who we are becoming. How often have we said quietly to ourselves, "We lost touch," or, "I wonder how they're doing these days." Or perhaps the heaviest thought of all, "I wish I'd said more, before it was too late." In a small Buddhist sangha nestled in the suburbs of San Jose, I once met a man named Roy. He was in his mid-80s. Tall and soft-spoken, with a kind tremble in his hands, a gift. He joked. From time, during a group reflection on forgiveness, Roy began to share. At first, his words came slowly, like stepping stones across an old stream. He spoke of a brother he hadn't spoken to in over 3 decades. A falling out, trivial in detail now, but sharp in memory, had severed their connection. The facts of the disagreement were long forgotten, but the wound remained. Still, every week, without fail, Roy thought of him. "I've written him letters," Roy said softly, his eyes glistening but steady. "But I never had the courage to send them." There's a timeless teaching in Buddhism. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal law. And in that moment, you could feel Roy not only wrestling with regret but with something even deeper, grief. Not grief for the dead, but for a relationship still living in the world, yet long abandoned in spirit. So many of us carry invisible threads tying us to others. Some are warm and reassuring. Others are frayed, knotted, tangled with misunderstanding. Some are so stretched by silence that we barely feel them anymore, but they're still there. And as the years pass, these bonds, spoken and unspoken, present or absent, begin to shape our inner landscape in subtle, unspoken ways. For some, it's the quiet joy of a marriage weathered by decades, soft and strong like worn cotton. For others, it's the ache of a friendship that slipped away, not by death, but by neglect. And for many, it's the bittersweet truth that we were physically present, but emotionally distant. From a Buddhist view, relationships aren't just emotional ties, they're sacred fields where our karma unfolds. Every interaction is a planting. A kind word becomes a seed of peace. A missed apology becomes a ripple that follows us silently. This is why the Buddha emphasized right speech and right intention. It's not about being perfect. It's about being awake, being here. A soft smile. A question asked with real interest. A quiet, "How have you been?" These are not small things. They are the threads that weave us together. There's a story in the Sutras of Devadatta, the Buddha's own cousin, who became his adversary. Despite betrayal and harm, the Buddha never returned anger with anger. Instead, he taught that the heart must remain spacious enough to hold even those who've hurt us, not to justify harm, but to release the bitterness that can quietly poison our spirit. If someone has come to mind while you're hearing this, a sibling, an old friend, a long-lost spouse, or even a neighbor you once shared morning coffee with, pause. Ask yourself gently, is there something left unsaid? Something worth reopening, not to fix the past, but to free the present? And if a conversation feels too far for now, begin small. Write a note. Send a simple message. Offer a quiet prayer. Even holding them in your heart with kindness, through the practice of metta bhavana, or loving kindness meditation, can begin to mend the invisible threads. Because in truth, relationships aren't only built on the big things, the anniversaries, the tearful reunions, the grand apologies. More often, they are built on the quiet, consistent gestures, a call just to check in, a remembered story, a patient ear, listening, without needing to fix. In the last reflection, we were reminded that not every broken bond finds its way back together. But even when reconciliation isn't possible, healing still is. Yes, some connections remain severed, not every door reopens, but peace, true, lasting peace, is still within reach. Not because the other person changes, but because you choose to stop carrying the suffering. The Dhammapada offers us a powerful reminder. Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Let us speak fewer words, but make them matter. Let us show love not in grand, dramatic gestures, but in the quiet, daily deposits of care. A gentle smile, a thoughtful message, a moment of presence. Let us make peace, not only with others, but within ourselves, for the ones we loved too little, too late. Because in the end, what truly matters is not the number of people we've known, but the depth of presence we offered to those who crossed our path. And here's the good news: it is never too late to plant one more seed of kindness, especially in the sacred space that still lives between two human hearts. Part 4. Purpose and inner work after retirement. After relationships, the next terrain we often encounter is a quieter, more personal one: our sense of purpose. This shift usually arrives after the structure of work begins to dissolve. No more morning rush. No more meetings, deadlines, or endless calendars. No more roles to perform in the professional world. At first, this absence feels like a celebration. You sleep in. You travel. You finally enjoy the leisure that once seemed like a distant dream. But then, after a few months, or maybe even a year, a quiet question begins to surface. It doesn't shout, it whispers, "Now what?" This is not a question of survival. It's a question of meaning. And for many people in their 60s and beyond, it becomes the most important question of all. I once met a man named Richard, a retired architect from Colorado. For over 40 years, he had designed buildings meant to outlast him: hospitals, schools, civic centers. He was thoughtful, disciplined, and deeply respected. But after he retired at 67, he told me something that struck me. He said, "I don't know who I am when I'm not building something." He didn't say it with sadness, more like curiosity. He wasn't lost, but he was untethered, like a ship that had finally left the harbor, but hadn't yet chosen its next course. It wasn't the job he missed. It was the sense of purpose. In Buddhism, there is a concept known as sankhara, mental formations, habits of becoming, doing, achieving. These patterns, if left unchecked, can steer our entire lives without ever stopping to ask if they still serve us. So in that light, retirement is not the end of purpose. It's the beginning of conscious purpose, a rare opportunity to turn inward and ask, who am I now, when I'm not being productive? What do I still long to give, not as a worker, a parent, or a provider, but simply as a human being? The Buddha taught that right livelihood isn't only about how we earn money, it's about how we live in alignment with our values. And in retirement, that alignment may take a new form. It might mean mentoring a curious teenager next door, or writing down the family stories that only you remember, or tending a garden, not to fill the hours, but to feel connected to something living and sacred. I once met a retired schoolteacher who said, "I thought I was done teaching when I left the classroom, but I've realized I'm still here to teach, just with fewer tests and more love." That's the heart of this chapter. Purpose isn't something you retire from. It's something that evolves with you, gentler, deeper, truer. In the last reflection, we explored how purpose doesn't disappear with age, it simply transforms. It shifts from doing to being, from striving to offering, and often, the most meaningful work comes not from grand achievements, but from quiet acts of care. I once met a retired schoolteacher who began reading aloud to children at the public library every Thursday. She called it her Dharma in disguise. To her, It wasn't just a pastime. It was a continuation of her inner work, showing up with patience, with presence, with warmth for others. She told me once, smiling softly, "When I stop giving, I stop growing." But here's the beautiful paradox. At this stage in life, purpose isn't necessarily about doing more. It's about being more present, more generous, more attuned to what quietly moves your heart, even if no one else sees it. Of course, there are days when the body feels heavier, when the world spins too fast, when you wonder, have I become invisible? But please, remember this truth. Your worth is not tied to how much you produce. Your presence, your listening, your memories, your calm wisdom, is a gift this noisy world still desperately needs. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha once shared, just as the great ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, so too, the Dharma has but one taste, the taste of liberation. And in this season of life, liberation often begins by freeing yourself from the belief that you still have something to prove. It means embracing your experience not as something behind you, but as something you now embody. You are a living testament to resilience, to quiet love, to everything you've walked through and survived. So if you find yourself wondering, what's my purpose now? Try asking instead, what brings my heart alive today? Where can I offer my stillness, my presence, my compassion? And know this, even the smallest acts, making a bowl of soup for a neighbor, lighting incense in the morning, sitting in silence with someone who is grieving, can be sacred offerings of the highest kind, not because they are grand, not because they are public, but because they are done with love and awareness. Purpose after retirement doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be real. And perhaps, your greatest contribution now is not what you build with your hands, but what you awaken in others, simply by being fully, unmistakably, beautifully yourself. Part 5. Health, Energy, and Compassion for the Body. With this shift in purpose comes another quiet realization, that the body, our lifelong companion, no longer responds with the ease it once did. The knees creak a little louder each morning. The back offers soft, persistent reminders. Even standing from a chair can feel like a meditation in patience. But instead of seeing these changes as betrayals, what if we learned to greet them as invitations? Whispers from the body saying, "Slow down, pay attention, be kind to me." In Buddhist philosophy, the body is not a burden on the path. It is the very first foundation of mindfulness. Kayanapasana, as it's known in the Satipatthana Sutta, is the practice of watching the body not with frustration or judgment, but with loving awareness that simply says, "I see you, old friend, I'm still here with you." In the previous reflection, we explored how aging invites us to move with more gentleness, to listen rather than resist. Now, let's take that understanding one step deeper. I thank you for carrying me. Those were the quiet, trembling words of a woman named Grace, whom I met during a mindfulness retreat in Northern California. She was 74, recovering from hip surgery, and still walking with the help of a cane. Most of her life had been defined by movement. She had hiked rugged trails, danced barefoot in moonlight, and even taught yoga to others seeking balance. But now, she said, She felt like a stranger in her own body. I felt betrayed, she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. Like my body had moved on, without telling me. And yet, something extraordinary unfolded over the course of the retreat. I watched Grace begin to befriend her body again. Each slow, measured step with her cane became an act of mindfulness. Each inhale and exhale became a quiet prayer. One morning, during walking meditation, she turned to me, eyes brimming with tears, and said, "I thought I needed to get strong again, but maybe what I really needed was to get kind." That simple shift, from performance to compassion, lies at the very heart of Buddhist practice. The Buddha taught us that our bodies are not machines to be pushed or perfected. They are temples, temporary, yes, fragile, yes, but also profoundly sacred. They are the vessels through which we experience every breath of this life. And when we stop resisting the truth of their aging, when we finally listen, something beautiful begins to happen. When was the last time you asked your body what it needed, instead of telling it what to do? We so often treat fatigue as weakness. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. We ignore pain, silence hunger, override natural rhythms, all in the name of productivity. But after 60, the body speaks more clearly. It no longer shouts, it whispers. And what it asks for is not discipline, but devotion. Not punishment, but presence. A Buddhist elder once said, "The body is our first teacher. It teaches impermanence every single day." And indeed, the wrinkles, the slower pace, the names we sometimes forget, these are not signs of failure. They are signs that the world is asking us to live differently. More slowly, more gently, more deeply. One of the most healing practices you can begin today is the body scan meditation. Lying down or sitting comfortably, you bring gentle attention to each part of your body. Not to fix, not to critique, but simply to notice. To offer awareness as you would to a beloved child, or a dear old friend. And you may be surprised at what arises. Not just tension, but gratitude. Not just discomfort, but forgiveness. Movement, too, can become sacred. You don't need to run marathons or return to the gym. A 10-minute walk beneath the morning sky. A few stretches before sleep. Even standing barefoot in your garden, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath your feet. These are not trivial gestures. They are rituals of return. They remind your body that it matters. That you still matter. That life, in all its quiet grace, is still moving through you. The Buddha once said, "To keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our minds strong and clear." This isn't about clinging to youth. It's about cultivating vitality. The kind of vitality that allows us to be fully awake for both the joy and the sorrow of being human. So if your body is slower now, if it trembles more, rests more, asks more of you, let it. Don't treat it as a broken tool. Treat it as a wise teacher. Because it is. It has carried you through decades. Through heartbreak and healing. Through grief and laughter. Through nights of loss and mornings of unexpected peace. And even now, each day, it wakes with a quiet whisper. Let's keep going. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest act of spiritual courage in this chapter of life is not to change your body, but to finally fully. Love it, exactly as it is. Part 6. Learning and sharing wisdom. When we begin to listen more deeply to the body, something else awakens too. A quiet wisdom. A desire not just to keep growing, but to start sharing. In the previous part, we explored how honoring the body with kindness can open us to deeper truths. And often, once we begin to truly listen to our breath, to our steps, to our aches, we find that something even more profound awakens, a desire to keep learning. There's a quiet misconception woven into our culture that learning is something for the young, a race that ends at graduation, a mountain we climb until we reach the top, diploma in hand. But the truth? The deepest learning often begins only after the pressure to succeed fades, and what's left is pure, unfiltered curiosity. It doesn't roar, it whispers, and more often than not, it whispers later in life. I remember attending a Dharma talk years ago at a small sangha tucked into the desert hills of New Mexico. The teacher that day wasn't a famous monk or scholar, but a 92-year-old lay practitioner named Samuel. He didn't begin with a teaching. He began with a question. "What are you learning these days?" he asked, eyes moving slowly around the room. Some people chuckled, thinking it was rhetorical, but Samuel paused, and then repeated it, softer this time. "I'm serious. What are you still learning?" The room fell silent, and then, with a gentle smile, he added, "I'm learning how to be gentle with my fear of forgetting names." No one laughed, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition. That moment, that simple, vulnerable confession, was the teaching. In Buddhism, there's a concept called prajna, wisdom, not just intellectual knowledge, but deep, embodied understanding, the kind carved slowly by heartbreak and healing, by decades of choosing to stay open, through joy, grief, and all the quiet in between. This kind of wisdom doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from showing up to life, again and again. And here's the beautiful truth. You don't have to be a monk to be a teacher. You don't even have to have the answers. Some of the wisest people I know are still learning themselves. The Buddha often said that sharing what we learn, not as experts, but as fellow travelers, is one of the most powerful ways to truly integrate it. A dear friend of mine, Linda, comes to mind. She began offering simple meditation classes at her local senior center. She was 76, no certification, no retreats in India, just 2 decades of quietly practicing mindfulness in her living room. When people around her began struggling with grief, anxiety, and the loneliness of aging, she didn't start teaching from a podium. She started sharing from her heart. "I'm not here to fix anyone," she told me once. "I just share what helped me breathe again." And that is what learning looks like after 60. It's not about mastery. It's about generosity. It's not always about passing knowledge to others. Sometimes, it's about reminding yourself, learning a new instrument, writing down your life stories for your grandchildren, exploring a Buddhist passage with fresh eyes, navigating your changing body with patience and grace, even learning how to be still again. These are all sacred forms of learning. The Buddha himself was not known as the one who knew everything. His name, Siddhartha, meant one who is on the path to understanding, not one who had arrived. but one who was still, beautifully, learning. Part 7. Letting go and lightening the load. As we continue this journey of reflection, one truth becomes harder to ignore. That sometimes, the greatest wisdom is knowing what to release. In the previous part, we reflected on how learning never truly ends, and that sharing what we've learned, no matter how small, can become a gift not just for others, but for ourselves. That same spirit of openness continues with something even more vital: the art of simply being real. That, in itself, is a lifelong identity. Another powerful practice, deeply rooted in Buddhist tradition, is Dharma sharing. Now, don't picture a formal setting, a microphone, or a crowd. It can be something as small and sacred as turning to a friend and saying, "I heard something today that moved me," or "This quote helped me through a difficult moment." When we offer what we've learned, even in whispers, even in unfinished thoughts, we create ripples. We light candles in places we may never walk. And yet, someone else might find their way by that very light. If you've ever felt like you have nothing left to teach, let me gently remind you of this. The person who still remembers what it's like to struggle often becomes the most compassionate guide. You don't need perfect answers. You only need presence. Sometimes, the most powerful words you can offer to someone younger aren't, "Here's what you should do," but simply, "I understand. I've been there too." That kind of honesty doesn't teach from a pedestal. It teaches from the heart. So, keep learning, not because you are incomplete, but because your soul expands each time you welcome new understanding. Keep teaching, not because you are superior, but because your footsteps may light the way for someone still lost in the dark. And above all, keep sharing your story, even if your voice shakes, even if the words come slowly. Because the world doesn't need more perfect experts. It needs real humans, willing to speak their truth out loud. Part 7. Peace in the storm of emotions. And sometimes, speaking our truth means meeting emotions we thought we had long outgrown. There's something paradoxical about emotions. They arrive and depart like clouds scattered across a vast sky. Some drifting gently, others crashing in like thunder. And yet, as we age, we may secretly expect ourselves to have mastered them. To feel that anger, regret, or sorrow should no longer visit us. As though age were some kind of emotional immunity. But here's the deeper truth. No one outgrows their humanity. And maybe we're not meant to. I remember sitting with a dignified, soft-spoken man named Arthur during a silent retreat. He was 81. For days, he attended every meditation session, calm and composed. But on the third day, he was absent. I found him later, sitting quietly by the garden's edge. His eyes were filled with tears. When I gently asked if he was okay, he shook his head and said softly, "I just remembered something cruel I said to my wife 40 years ago. It just came back." That's the thing about the past. It doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes, emotions return like letters delivered late, years, even decades, after we wrote them. And when they do, we are offered a sacred opportunity. Not to judge, not to run, but to meet that feeling with presence. In the Buddhist tradition, emotions are not seen as enemies. They are visitors, cittavithi, mind moments that arise due to causes and conditions. The Buddha taught a powerful insight. Most intense emotions, anger, fear, sadness, have a physiological lifespan of just 90 seconds. That is, if we don't feed them with stories, resistance, or rumination, the first wave may be beyond our control. But what happens next? That's where our freedom begins. One of the most gentle and transformative practices in Buddhist psychology is called RAIN, an acronym introduced by teacher Tara Brach. Built on centuries of mindfulness tradition. Recognize what is happening. Allow it to be there. Investigate with curiosity. Nurture with kindness. So when sorrow arises, whether stirred by a memory, disappointment, or simply the ache of being human, you can pause, place a hand gently on your heart, and breathe. Recognize, this is sorrow. Allow. It's okay to feel this. In the previous part, we explored how recognizing and allowing our emotions, with gentleness, can lead to profound healing. Now, let's go even deeper into how we care for these emotions once we've welcomed them in. Investigate. What does this emotion feel like in my body? And then, nurture. May I hold this with care? This is not weakness. This is inner strength. This is what spiritual maturity looks like. Walking into life's storms with an umbrella of awareness, instead of pretending there is no rain. The Buddha himself was never distant from emotion. He wept at the passing of loved ones. He comforted the ill with the gentlest touch. He once told Ananda, his devoted attendant, loving others deeply is not a distraction from the path. It is the path. But the world we live in today often tells a different story. Get over it. Stay strong. Keep moving. But what if real strength is not in denying our emotions, but in holding them softly, like one would hold a crying child? I remember a woman in her early 60s once said to me, "I spent my whole life trying not to feel too much. Now, I just let myself feel everything. And strangely, I've never been more at peace." And you could see it in her face. Not a life free of pain, but a life free from resistance. You see, emotions are not problems to be fixed. They are messages, sometimes tangled, sometimes hard to read, but always pointing to something within us that longs to be seen, heard, healed. And when we avoid hard conversations, when we bury what aches, we accumulate emotional debt, like unopened letters piling up in the quiet hallway of the heart. The longer they sit, the heavier they become. But one honest sentence, spoken with love, can clear years of silence. So, let this be the season in your life when you stop apologizing for feeling, when you no longer hide your tears, or swallow the truth that needs to be spoken. Let this be the time when you sit down with sorrow, with joy, with grief, and say softly, "You are welcome here." As the Buddha once said, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not moved by praise or blame. And yet, even the rock feels the wind." Let that be your strength. Not in being unmoved, but in remaining centered amidst the motion. Because peace doesn't mean the storm never comes. It means you no longer lose yourself in the rain. Part 8. Money, time, and the inner riches. As we age, another question begins to echo louder. What have we really been accumulating? Somewhere along the winding path of life, Many of us are taught, often without words, that success means accumulation. A bigger house, a nicer car, a well-stocked retirement fund, a polished resume, a full bank account. And to be fair, none of these things are wrong on their own. They can offer comfort, security, even dignity. But trouble begins when we start to confuse net worth with self-worth. When the chase for money quietly consumes the very thing it was meant to protect. Our time. I once had tea with a retired attorney named Charles. He had spent over 40 years climbing the ladder of professional success. He was brilliant, respected, financially secure, and yet, as we sat together looking out at his garden, he said softly, "I thought I was building a life. Turns out, I was building a fortress." That single sentence broke something open in both of us. The Buddha was never against wealth. He taught kings and merchants. He accepted offerings from those who had means. But over and over again, he warned about attachment. Not just to objects, but to the illusion that things can protect us from impermanence. Because they cannot. In the previous reflection, we explored how our pursuit of wealth can quietly overshadow the very life it was meant to support. Now, let's turn toward a deeper question. How much is truly enough? The Buddha once said that the wise person gives freely and lives with a heart unburdened by clinging. But what does that really mean in our modern lives? It means asking yourself, honestly, is your wealth giving you more life, or quietly costing you life? So many people spend the healthiest, most energetic decades of their lives chasing income, only to later spend that income trying to buy back time, or to restore the peace and connection they lost along the way. But time isn't a savings account. It can't be stored, it can't be rewound. And unlike money, no one knows how much of it they truly have left. There's a beautiful and powerful term in psychology now: time affluence. The sense of having enough time to do what matters. Strangely, research shows that as people grow wealthier, their feeling of time affluence often declines. Why? Because higher income usually brings more responsibilities, more expectations, more lifestyle demands. The bigger the house, the more to clean. The newer the car, the more to insure. The more you own, the more attention you owe. A Buddhist monk once told me something that stayed with me. Every object you buy also buys a portion of your attention. Be careful what you purchase with your peace. There's a quiet, beautiful transformation that begins when people shift from valuing possessions to valuing experiences. A walk under golden leaves at sunset. A trip to feel the ocean breeze on your skin. A quiet dinner with a friend who truly listens. These are the treasures that do not depreciate. They don't lose value, they grow sweeter with time. And they often cost far less than we think. I once met an elder who had a lovely ritual. Every month, instead of buying something new for herself, she used that money to create a small moment of joy for someone else. A surprise lunch for her daughter. Fresh flowers left anonymously on a neighbor's porch. A donation to a local food bank. She smiled and said, "It makes me feel wealthier than anything hanging in my closet." This isn't about guilt. It's about freedom. In Buddhist thought, real wealth is not measured in dollars. but in inner spaciousness. It's the ability to sit quietly in your home, take a deep breath, and feel that nothing owns you. It's the capacity to say no to what drains you, and yes to what truly nourishes you. Perhaps one of the Buddha's most timeless teachings on money was this: live with enough, share the rest, not as a sacrifice, but as liberation. Because when we loosen our grip on money, we often discover how tightly money had been gripping us. So ask yourself gently, what is enough for me, truly? What would I do with more time even if I had less income? Where have I confused busyness for richness? You may not be able to buy more years, but you can absolutely uncover more life within the years you already have. And when you look back someday, it probably won't be your bank balance you remember, but how freely you gave, how deeply you lived, and how richly you loved. With both hands open. Part 9. Creative expression in later years. There's a quiet miracle that often emerges in the later chapters of life. A soft return to creativity. In the last reflection, we opened the door to creative expression in later life, not as a performance, but as a quiet return to the soul. Now, let's step into that space more fully. I once met a retired mail carrier named Martha. She had raised 4 children and spent most of her adult life rising before dawn, working long, honest hours delivering letters in sun and snow. At 71, newly widowed and living alone, Martha began painting, not on canvas, but on scraps of cardboard she found behind the grocery store. At first, she told me, it was just something to keep my hands busy. But slowly, her garage transformed. Its walls bloomed with color, sunsets, rolling hills, birds mid-flight frozen in a brushstroke. I asked her once, "Did you always love painting?" She paused, then smiled with a kind of quiet awe. "I think I always loved noticing," she said. "I just didn't know it had somewhere to go." That answer stayed with me. In the Buddhist tradition, creativity isn't separate from the spiritual path. It is the path, when walked with presence, arranging flowers in a vase, humming while you stir soup, writing a line of poetry in the margin of a grocery list. Each can be mindfulness in motion. The poet Basho, a Zen practitioner, once wrote, "Sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself." Sometimes, the grass of our creativity has been growing wild for decades. Unnoticed, untended, but it's still there, still alive, still waiting. And the quiet gift of aging is that we finally have the space to tend it. To return to the dusty piano, the untold memoirs, the half-knit sweaters, the recipes we meant to pass down. Often, what holds us back isn't lack of time. It's fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of doing it wrong. Fear that we've started too late. But the Dharma reminds us, now is always the right time. The lotus, after all, blooms from muddy water, and our creativity, too, can blossom after seasons of silence. There is a Zen saying, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." At this stage of life, you are perfectly poised to return to beginner's mind. Not because you know nothing, but because you've lived long enough to let go of needing to get it right. Maybe you once loved to sing but were told your voice didn't measure up. Maybe you wanted to dance but felt awkward or watched. Maybe you longed to write but froze at the page. Let this chapter of your life be the one where you reclaim those forgotten expressions. Not for praise, but for the quiet joy of being alive. Even the simplest acts can become sacred offerings. Arranging stones in your garden, baking bread for a grandchild, making a scrapbook with handwritten memories. These are not just hobbies. They are spiritual gestures, whispers to life itself saying, I am still here, and I still have something beautiful to give. And if the inspiration doesn't come easily, that's okay too. Creativity often starts like a rusty faucet. The first turns feel stiff, the flow uneven, but if you stay with it, keep showing up, clarity begins to flow. Don't let perfection rob you of your joy. As one Buddhist teacher once said, the most beautiful bowls are the ones with cracks. They let the light through. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are simply in a riper season, with deeper roots and softer petals. So paint, write, dance in your kitchen at dusk. Whisper your memories to the trees. Create, not because you have to, but because your soul still remembers how. And in doing so, you don't just express yourself. You become the expression, a quiet poem in motion, a brushstroke held in time, a song, hummed gently by life itself. Part 10. Energy and Mindful Living. There comes a time in life when something even more precious than time begins to surface. Energy. In the previous section, we explored how energy becomes more precious than time as we grow older. Now, let's look deeper. How can we preserve that energy for the things that truly matter? I once met a quiet man named Elias during a meditation retreat in Oregon. He was 73 and had retired early to enjoy his golden years with his beloved wife. But shortly after, she passed away unexpectedly. From then on, each day felt long and heavy for him, directionless. I have time, he told me one afternoon, but I don't seem to have the will to do anything with it. I just feel tired. He wasn't ill, nor was he depressed. He was simply exhausted, from years of putting himself last, of giving and doing without ever pausing to refill his own well. In Buddhist teaching, right effort is one of the core parts of the Eightfold Path. But effort here doesn't mean striving to the point of burnout. It means using energy wisely, directing it toward what nourishes, uplifts, and frees the heart. Like a gardener choosing where to water, we must tend only to what truly matters. One often overlooked truth in the West is this: rest is not laziness, it is a sacred act. The body, like the earth, needs its seasons of stillness. Just as a field must lie fallow before it can bloom again, we too need time to simply be. Modern life trains us otherwise. Even in retirement, the habit of overdoing lingers. Many feel guilty if they aren't productive, as though rest must be earned. But the Dharma says otherwise. Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, people cannot live without a spiritual life, the Buddha said. And what fuels that spiritual life? Not constant motion, but clarity, softness, and deep presence. Here's a small practice to try. Before starting any task, whether making breakfast or calling a friend, pause and ask, does this give me life, or does it take it away? Listen to your body's response. You'll feel the answer. Some things quietly energize us. Reading, walking among trees, laughing with someone dear. Others wear us down. Too much news, draining conversations, constant multitasking. Also pay attention to your daily rhythms. Mornings often hold the most clarity. Yet many people use them making small decisions that drain their focus. What to wear, what to eat, what to clean. That's why monks wear the same robes every day. Not out of austerity, but to preserve energy for what truly matters. This is the wisdom of decision simplicity. Wear what feels good, eat what nourishes, make room for what lifts your spirit. There's also a concept called strategic incompetence, a playful, counterintuitive idea. It means intentionally being bad at things that don't serve your path, so others stop asking you to do them. You don't need to be good at everything. You don't have to say yes to every request. Protecting your energy is not selfish, it's sacred stewardship. There's also great power in mindful recovery. A short nap, a slowly sipped cup of tea, even 5 minutes at the window watching light move across the wall. These are not indulgences. They are doorways back to yourself. A monk I once studied with in Thailand said, "Meditation is not about sitting still. It's about returning to the place where you stopped listening." You can meditate while folding laundry, while sweeping, while sipping warm soup. The key is not perfection, it is presence. So ask yourself gently, what brings me back to myself? And begin there. Because a full life is not measured by how much we did, but by how alive we felt while doing it. Let your energy be spent on kindness. Let your strength be reserved for love. Let the rest fall away, like autumn leaves making space for spring. After learning to conserve our energy and cultivate mindful presence, another quiet truth begins to emerge. We were never meant to walk this path alone. There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't say much. It just sits next to you at dinner. It lingers quietly after you say, "I'm fine." And as we grow older, this kind of quiet solitude can become a familiar companion. But here's the thing, we were never meant to do this life alone. Even the Buddha, after attaining enlightenment beneath the Bodhi tree, did not choose to remain in silence forever. He walked. He taught. He gathered a sangha, a community of monks, nuns, and laypeople, not to worship him, but to support one another along the path of awakening. I once visited a small Buddhist center in Vermont, tucked between tall pine trees and still, mirror-like lakes. The temple wasn't large, and neither was the gathering. Just a handful of elders seated on folding chairs, sipping tea after meditation. There were no robes that day, no chants, just gentle laughter, soft conversation, and the quiet, unmistakable beauty of belonging. A woman named Ruth smiled at me and said, "I don't really come here for the teachings. I come because someone remembers my name." That sentence rang in me like a bell. Because community isn't just about being close in space. It's about being seen. It's knowing someone notices when you're not there. That someone remembers your favorite kind of tea. That someone asks how your hip is healing, not out of politeness, but because they sincerely care. In Buddhist tradition, Sangha is one of the three jewels, alongside the Buddha and the Dharma. That's how sacred community is. The Buddha once said, "Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie is the whole of the holy life." He understood that while wisdom may ripen in solitude, compassion blooms in connection. Yet in modern society, especially in the West, independence is often mistaken for strength. We're taught to be self-sufficient, to age gracefully without burdening anyone. And so many suffer quietly, believing that needing others is a weakness, or worse, an inconvenience. But the truth is, we need each other. Not just for help, but for joy, for laughter, for the sacred simplicity of sitting together in silence. I once met a retired nurse named Gloria, who began hosting tea circles in her backyard every Sunday afternoon. There was no structure, no schedule, just neighbors, young and old, coming together to drink tea, to share stories, or simply to sit in stillness. It's not a support group, she told me with a smile. But somehow, we all end up feeling supported. That's the magic of presence. Building community doesn't require grand plans. It can begin with a phone call, a handwritten letter, an invitation to take a walk, a check-in with someone you haven't spoken to in a while. Each act of connection is like water for a soul's garden, nourishing what might otherwise wither unseen. And if you feel like your circle has grown small, or maybe vanished entirely, remember, it's never too late to plant new seeds. A simple conversation with a neighbor can blossom into a lasting friendship. Joining a local group, a book club, a meditation circle, a garden gathering, can gently reopen the heart in surprising ways. Because belonging isn't about being popular. It's about being present. It's about letting others see you, not as who you were, or who you think you should be, but as who you are now. Fully, honestly, tenderly, the Buddha reminded us, the path is not only inward, it is also outward, toward each other. After understanding the value of connection and quiet belonging, we realize that building community isn't just something we do. It's something we become. Every kind word, every listening ear, every shared moment of stillness. They are not small things. They are bricks in a bridge that connects us across the illusion of separateness. So reach out, not with expectation, but with openness. Offer your time, your attention, your gentle smile, because in doing so, you don't just build a community, you become it. Part 11. Clear seeing and wise decision making. There is a kind of clarity that only time can bring. Not the dramatic kind that strikes like lightning in a storm, but the kind that rises slowly, like morning sunlight spilling across a quiet wooden floor. It often doesn't come from gaining more knowledge, but from finally seeing clearly what was always there. And yet, clarity doesn't come automatically with age. It must be cultivated, because while experience may grow, so can our habits, our fears, our unexamined stories. If we're not mindful, we can continue choosing from reaction, not from wisdom. The Buddha had a name for this: moha, delusion, a fog of misunderstanding that clouds our judgment and distorts what's real. But he also offered the antidote, vipassana, clear seeing. I once spoke with a retired librarian named Janice, a woman with quiet eyes and a grounded voice. She told me about a moment that forever changed the way she made choices. I used to react to everything, she said. If someone was sharp with me, I'd either shut down or snap back. I wasn't making decisions, I was just bouncing from emotion to emotion. But now, I pause. I ask myself, what is really true in this moment? And often, the truth is not what I first thought. That pause, that sacred space between stimulus and response, is where liberation lives. Most of us move through life in reaction mode. A feeling arises, and we obey it. A thought appears, and we follow it. But the Buddha taught that much of our suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, but from how we unconsciously respond. He once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow, like a shadow that never leaves." This is why cultivating wise discernment becomes so important in the later chapters of life. You may not be choosing careers anymore, but you're choosing how to spend your time, how to relate to your body, your family, your energy. You're choosing what you let in and what you let go. One powerful practice in Buddhist psychology is called second-order thinking. It means not just asking, "What happens if I do this?" but also, "What happens after that? What ripple will this choice send out?" For example, saying yes to something just to be polite. Will that create quiet resentment later? Avoiding a hard conversation. Will that create emotional debt over time? Another practice is inverse thinking. Instead of asking, "How can I find peace?" try asking, "How am I contributing to my own restlessness?" It requires humility. It requires honesty. But it gives you a clarity that no external advice ever could. I once heard a Dharma teacher say, "Most of the time, we're not choosing wisely. We're just choosing comfortably. And at first, that stings. But if you sit with it, you begin to realize wisdom often asks for discomfort. Not the kind that wounds, but the kind that wakes us up. Because truth doesn't always feel good, but it always sets us free." After learning how wisdom often arises through discomfort and honesty, we now turn toward how we can cultivate that clarity gently, intentionally, moment by moment, because truth, even when it unsettles us at first, has a way of clearing the fog. It doesn't always arrive like a thunderclap. Sometimes, it shows up like soft morning light spilling over a windowsill. So how do we begin to truly see with clear eyes? We start by slowing down, by returning to Chan Nims, mindfulness in every small act, washing dishes with full attention, listening without planning what we'll say next, walking not to get somewhere, but simply to feel the texture of the ground beneath each step. And instead of asking shallow questions like, "What do I feel like doing?" we begin to ask deeper ones. What choice honors my deepest values? What brings genuine peace to my heart? Not approval, not applause, but peace? And when clarity doesn't come right away, because sometimes it won't, we don't panic. We pause. We breathe. We trust. Because truth doesn't always announce itself loudly. More often, it whispers. In the end, wisdom isn't about one grand decision. It's found in 1,000 small ones, each made with care, each aligned with our values. It's knowing when to speak, and when to stay silent, when to move forward, and when to step back with grace, when to say yes, and when to gently bow out. So if you find yourself unsure of your next step, don't rush to figure it out. Maybe just sit, light a candle, let the waters of your mind settle, like a pond after the wind has passed. In that stillness, something deeper begins to rise. Not from fear, not from ego, but from the quiet, rooted knowing that lives within you, like a flame untouched by wind. That is prajna. That is wisdom. Part 12. Designing a life of inner peace. There comes a moment, often after many chapters of striving, when we stop trying to figure everything out and begin to listen instead. Not to the noise of the world, nor the expectations of others, but to the quiet hum beneath our thoughts, the voice of inner wisdom, always waiting. For many, that shift begins around age 60. When titles fade, parent, worker, caretaker, and the busyness begins to soften, what arises in their place? A beautiful, and sometimes frightening question: how do I want to live now? In Buddhist teaching, we learn that life doesn't simply happen to us. We co-create it, moment by moment, breath by breath, through our choices, and through the intentions we carry in our heart. The Buddha called this bhavana, the cultivation of the mind, the conscious shaping of our inner landscape. And from that landscape, our outer life naturally begins to blossom. I once met a man named Thomas, a retired firefighter in his 70s. For most of his life, he ran into burning buildings. He was always answering someone else's emergency. Then one day, no one needed him. No one was calling his name. And for a while, that silence felt unbearable, like emptiness. But slowly, Thomas began taking long walks. At first, it was just for exercise. But then, something shifted. He started bringing a notebook, jotting down thoughts, writing haikus, remembering stories, listing gratitudes. I used to put out fires, he said. Now, I light candles. That shift, from reacting to reflecting, from fixing to simply being, that's what designing a life of peace looks like. And here's the truth: we don't need a perfect blueprint. Because in the Dharma, peace isn't found in control. It's found in responsiveness. We design our life not by forcing it into shape, but by making small, loving adjustments as we go. Course corrections, rooted in clarity, compassion, and presence. One beautiful practice? Imagine your life as a garden. Each day, ask yourself, what am I planting? What am I watering? What needs gentle pruning? And what can I let bloom, simply by not interfering? Maybe your new beginning starts right here, with a morning of silence, instead of screens. After learning to treat life as a garden, planting, pruning, and letting things bloom naturally, we now arrive at the final, and perhaps most tender invitation, to live with presence, not perfection. Maybe now, you give yourself permission to say no, without guilt, and say yes only when your heart hums softly in agreement. Maybe you begin to set aside time each week, not for errands or chores, but for soul work, journaling, prayer, meditation, or simply lying beneath the sky and watching clouds drift by like old thoughts finally passing. You don't have to overhaul your entire life in one grand gesture. As one Zen teacher once said, if you want to transform your life, start by changing how you tie your shoes. Because the smallest shifts, done with gentle consistency and mindful presence, often create the most lasting peace. And peace, in this deeper sense, does not mean the absence of hardship. It means we stop arguing with reality. It means meeting each moment with openness, instead of resistance. The Buddha taught that the root of suffering is tanha, craving, clinging, the restless belief that this moment, this life, is not yet enough. But he also offered a liberating path forward, letting go, not of life itself, but of the illusion that you must keep striving to become whole. So maybe designing a peaceful life isn't about adding more, but about subtracting what no longer serves. Let go of the need to be productive every single hour. Let go of people who deplete your joy. Let go of identities that no longer feel true. Let go of the story that you're running out of time. Because right here, right now, you are exactly where life has brought you. And this place, however imperfect, is a sacred beginning, so designed gently, with soft hands, with a tender heart. Let your life become a sanctuary, not for perfection, but for presence. A quiet haven where peace isn't something you earn for doing everything right, but something that blooms naturally when you begin to love what is. And one day, when you look back, may your life feel not like a list of regrets, but like a handmade tapestry, stitched with intention, colored by kindness, and woven with the quiet joy of having truly, deeply lived. Conclusion. Making each hour count. If you've come this far, still here, still listening, then perhaps something in you has softened, or perhaps something has awakened. A flicker of clarity, a gentle realization that maybe, just maybe, you don't need more time. You just need more presence. Throughout this journey, we haven't tried to outrun the ticking clock. We've made no promises of eternal youth or endless days. Instead, we've returned, again and again, to something far more powerful. This breath, this moment, this brief, fragile, luminous human life. You see, the Buddha's teachings were never about escaping life. They were always about entering it more fully, with clarity, with compassion, with courage. And as we've seen, the truly meaningful changes don't come from sweeping revolutions. They come from small, intentional choices, repeated with love, choosing to pause before you speak, choosing to forgive, even when no apology comes, choosing to walk slower, breathe deeper, love wider, choosing to let go, again and again and again. From time and energy, to relationships and creativity, from material simplicity to emotional courage. Every theme we've explored really points to the same truth. Living awake, not perfectly, not without pain, but awake enough to notice the color of the sky today. Awake enough to hear warmth in a friend's voice. Awake enough to sit with sorrow and not push it away. Awake enough to feel joy, without needing a reason. The Buddha once reminded his disciples, a single moment of pure awareness is more precious than 100 years lived in forgetfulness. So if you're wondering where to begin, the answer is simple: here. And if you're wondering when, the answer is now. Because your life is not behind you. It's not waiting for some better version of you to arrive. It's already here, unfolding, offering itself. Moment by moment. Maybe today, all you do is sit for 5 minutes with a warm cup of tea, noticing how it feels in your hands. Maybe you reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe you say, "I forgive you." Or maybe More importantly, you say it to yourself. Maybe today, you simply look out the window and whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for the breath. Thank you for this body. Thank you for one more chance to begin again." Because that's all we ever truly need. Not more time, but more presence within the time we have. So as we close this reflection, I invite you, gently, without urgency, to choose just one idea from all we've shared. Just one. Let it sit beside you like a quiet friend. Let it take root in your day. Let it shape how you move through this world. With less fear, with more grace, with a heart that remembers what really matters. You were never meant to race through life. You were meant to live it. Slowly, sincerely, deeply, and no matter your age, your past, or your regrets, it is never too late to begin again. Because in the end, life is not measured by how many years we live, but by how many moments we are truly awake for. And the best moment to wake up is always now.